The wind screamed across Talvo's Nine like it wanted to tear the world apart. Dust and ash swirled in angry clouds that turned day into twilight. The mining colony huddled beneath protective domes, small islands of light in an ocean of volcanic rage. This planet hated everything that lived on it, and most days the colonists wondered why they stayed. Kareth didn't wonder. He'd stopped wondering about anything centuries ago. He rested in the shadow of the largest processing facility, his massive body coiled like a mountain of dark scales and ancient muscle. 800 years had carved his existence into something simple. He guarded, he threatened, he crushed anything that challenged the people who paid him. The miners walked long paths to avoid him. Children were taught his name as a warning. Even the colony's security teams gave his territory wide clearance. The Ashen Claw, they called him across 17 systems, a reputation earned in blood and fire, built on the bones of those who tested him. His copper eyes had watched civilizations rise and fall. His claws had torn through starship hulls like paper. His wings could block out suns when he chose to fly. And in 8 centuries, not one living thing had ever approached him without fear or violence in their hearts. The storm intensified as evening fell. Lightning split the purple sky in jagged white scars. Kareth barely noticed. Weather was just another enemy that couldn't hurt him. Then the alarms started. Emergency landing protocols blared across the colony's communication system. A human freighter, damaged and desperate, dropping through the atmosphere too fast. Kareth watched with mild interest as the ship carved a burning trail through the clouds. It hit the landing pad hard, metal shrieking against concrete, pieces flying in every direction. The storm surge hit moments later, winds strong enough to knock grown adults off their feet. Colony personnel rushed toward the crashed ship in full environmental suits. The freighter's hull had split open in 3 places. People poured out into the screaming wind, families clutching whatever they could carry. Refugees, Kareth realized, running from something worse than this hellish planet. Among the chaos, a young couple stumbled down the freighter's ramp. The woman held something wrapped in thermal blankets close to her chest, while the man tried to shield them both from the flying debris. They made it perhaps 20 steps before a massive gust hit them sideways. The woman went down hard. The bundle flew from her arms and rolled across the tarmac. The man helped the woman up. They turned back for the bundle, but another wave of evacuees surged between them. Someone shouted coordinates for the emergency shelters. The crowd pushed forward. In seconds, the couple was swept away with the others, disappearing into the storm-dark colony. The bundle lay forgotten on the ground, already half buried in ash. Kareth watched it tumble in the wind, rolling closer to his position. Probably supplies, he thought. Humans always panicked and dropped things when danger arrived. He'd seen it countless times. They were fragile that way. The bundle came to rest against a broken piece of the freighter's hull, just at the edge of Kareth's shadow. It moved. His eyes focused. The thermal blanket had come partially unwrapped. Something small and pink squirmed inside. Soft sounds reached his ears, barely audible over the wind, not distress exactly, more like curiosity. A tiny human hand emerged from the blanket, fingers spreading and closing. The hand found purchase on the ground and pulled. The blanket fell away completely. An infant. The baby couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 months old, too young to walk but old enough to crawl. She pushed herself forward on unsteady arms, heading directly toward the shadow beneath Kareth's chest. Ash coated her dark hair. Her brown eyes were wide but not frightened. Kareth went completely still. This made no sense. Every instinct evolution had given this creature should be screaming danger. Even human adults knew better than to approach him. Yet here came this impossibly small thing, dragging herself across sharp rocks and debris like she'd found something interesting. She reached the edge of his shadow and paused, looked up. Kareth's face was 3 times larger than her entire body. His teeth could snap her in half without effort. One claw could pierce through her like she was made of mist. He'd killed things that terrified entire planets. He was death given scales and wings. The baby giggled. The sound cut through 800 years of certainty like it was nothing. She reached up with both hands toward his face, making happy noises that humans made when they found something they liked. Her fingers grasped at empty air between them. Kareth's mind went blank. This had never happened. Nothing in his entire existence had prepared him for a creature that should fear him, choosing instead to reach toward him with trust, so complete it bordered on stupid. The baby's arms got tired. She lowered them and looked around, seeming to notice for the first time that she was alone in a storm on a strange world. Her face scrunched up. She was going to cry. Before he understood what he was doing, Kareth lowered his head, brought his massive skull down until his snout was level with the infant. She immediately reached out and grabbed the ridge above his nostril with surprising strength. She pulled herself closer and pressed her face against his scales. The crying stopped. She made a satisfied sound and closed her eyes. Kareth felt her heartbeat against his face, impossibly fast and fragile, felt the trust radiating from her like heat. And something inside him, something he'd thought had died centuries ago, cracked open. The storm raged on through the night, but in the shadow of the galaxy's most feared predator, one human baby slept peacefully for the first time since leaving home. Dawn broke over Talvos 9 with the storm finally exhausted. Silence felt wrong after hours of screaming wind. Kareth hadn't moved in 9 hours. His muscles ached from holding the same protective curl around the sleeping infant, but moving might wake her, and something about that felt worse than any physical discomfort. She stirred as sunlight crept across the landing pad, stretched like all small creatures did when waking, opened her eyes and looked directly at him. For a frozen moment, Kareth waited for the fear to arrive, for her young mind to finally understand what he was. Instead, she smiled, reached up to pat his snout with one small hand. His chest made a sound he didn't recognize, almost like the purring noise he'd heard felines make, but deeper, resonating through his entire body. The baby seemed delighted by this, pressing her ear against his scales to feel the vibration. In the distance, voices carried across the empty space, shouting, desperate and raw. The baby's parents. Kareth felt something twist in his chest. He'd spent the night discovering what it meant to have something trust him completely, and now he had to return her. Had to watch that trust transfer back to where it belonged. The rational part of his mind knew this was correct, the part that had spent the night. Feeling her heartbeat against his scales, wanted to wrap his wings around her and never let go. The voices grew closer. Colony workers emerged from between the buildings, spreading across the landing pad in search patterns. At the center, a young man and woman moved with the frantic energy of parents who'd lost everything that mattered. One of the workers spotted Kareth and froze, held up a hand to stop the others. The entire search party went still. Kareth knew what they saw, the monster, the legend. The thing their children had nightmares about, and somewhere near him a missing baby. The young woman saw her daughter and made a sound that no language had words for. She started running before anyone could stop her. The young man caught up to her, both of them sprinting towards certain death because their child was in its shadow. They stopped 3 body lengths away, close enough to see but far enough to maybe escape if he attacked. Close enough to see their daughter perfectly safe, curled against his chest, playing with the edge of his wing like it was a blanket. The woman's legs nearly gave out. The man caught her, they stared. The baby noticed her parents and made happy sounds, but she didn't crawl toward them. Instead, she patted Kareth's scales again, as if showing them something she'd found. Kareth had fought in wars, had faced down armadas, had stared into the eyes of creatures that could crack planets. None of it compared to the difficulty of what he had to do next. Slowly, with more care than he'd ever shown anything, he extended his front claws under the baby and lifted her. The crowd gasped. Some of the workers reached for weapons they didn't have. But Kareth just held the infant in his claws like she was made of glass and starlight, and carefully extended his arms toward her parents. The woman stepped forward on shaking legs, reached out, took her daughter back. For exactly 3 seconds, the baby seemed confused. Then she realized what was happening and immediately reached back toward Kareth, making distressed sounds. She squirmed in her mother's arms, little hands grasping for the dragon she'd spent the night with. The woman looked at her daughter, looked at Kareth, looked at her husband with an expression that said she was seeing something impossible. She stepped closer, not away. "She likes you," the woman said. Her voice shook but held steady. "That's impossible, but she does." Kareth had no practice with gentle words. His voice came out like distant thunder, unused to softness. The impossible happened when she was not afraid. The baby continued reaching for him, making upset sounds. Before he could think better of it, Kareth lowered his head again, brought his snout close enough for her to touch. She immediately pressed both hands against his scales and smiled through her tears. The young man found his voice. "I'm David, this is Lynn, our daughter is Amy." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "You kept her safe through the storm." "She crawled into my shadow," Kareth said. "I could not let harm find her there." Lynn shifted Amy in her arms, studying Kareth with eyes that reminded him of her daughter's. Unafraid but calculating, seeing something others missed. "You're the Ashen Claw. The miners tell stories about you, how you've never shown mercy, how you've destroyed anyone who challenged you. The stories are true. But you didn't hurt our daughter." Kareth didn't have an answer. 800 years of certainty had shattered in one night. He'd been a weapon so long he'd forgotten weapons could choose not to fire. Amy babbled something that sounded almost like words. She pushed away from her mother and managed to crawl onto Kareth's snout, settling there like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lynn's arms hovered nearby, ready to catch her, but she didn't pull her back. David made a choked sound that might have been a laugh. "She's never done that, not even with us. She's usually scared of new things." "Perhaps she knows I am very old," Kareth said carefully, holding absolutely still with the infant sitting on his face. "And very old things sometimes forget how to be frightening." The crowd of workers had moved closer, watching in stunned silence. One of them, an older man with gray hair and colony administrator markings, spoke up. "In 20 years on Talvos 9, I've never seen you move like that, like you were scared of breaking something." Kareth met the man's eyes. "Because I was. Because for the first time in 8 centuries, something trusted me, and I discovered that trust is more terrifying than any enemy I have ever faced." Amy yawned and laid down on his snout, apparently deciding it made an excellent bed. Lynn stepped closer and carefully sat next to Kareth's head, one hand on her daughter, the other resting against his. "Scales. My mother used to say that humans survived Earth not by conquering its monsters," Lynn said softly, "but by befriending them. I always thought it was just a story." Kareth felt the weight of Amy's tiny body, the warmth of her mother's hand, the eyes of dozens of witnesses seeing him as something other than a weapon. He thought about 800 years of shadows and violence, and he thought about one night of feeling something other than alone. "Perhaps," he rumbled, so quietly only Lynn could hear, "your mother's story is not finished yet." 3 weeks changed everything. The refugee families from the freighter settled into temporary housing near the processing facilities. Mining corporation protocols said they should be moved to permanent settlements within a month, but paperwork moved slowly, and Talvos 9 wasn't in any hurry to lose the extra hands. David found work in maintenance. Lynn helped in the medical center, and Amy visited Kareth every single day. At first, the colony watched like they expected disaster, waited for the legendary Ashen Claw to remember what he was and return to old patterns. But disaster never came. Instead, they witnessed something none of them would have believed if they hadn't seen it themselves. Kareth learned gentleness. It started with simple things, adjusting how he moved so his steps didn't shake the ground when Amy was near, angling his wings to provide shade when the binary suns beat down too hard, making that deep rumbling sound she loved because it made her laugh, but it went deeper than physical care. He started noticing things he'd spent centuries ignoring, the way light shifted through dust, the sound of Amy's voice forming new words, the feeling of being wanted for something other than violence. Other children lost their fear faster than their parents expected. They watched from safe distances at first, then closer, then sometimes brave enough to wave. Amy would wave back and point at Kareth like she was sharing a secret. "Look what I found," her gestures seemed to say. "Isn't he wonderful?" The colony administrator, Grant Williams, approached on a Tuesday morning. Kareth had been watching Amy stack rocks into towers that immediately fell over, her determination to rebuild them stronger than any logic. "Mining corporations sent new orders," Grant said without preamble. "They want you gone." Kareth's copper eyes focused on him. "I have honored every term of our contract." "That's the problem. They hired the Ashen Claw, a reputation, a warning to anyone thinking about causing trouble. But word is spreading that you've gone soft, that you spend your days playing with a human baby instead of enforcing order. The corporation thinks you're a liability now." Amy's tower fell again. She made a frustrated sound and looked at Kareth. He carefully used one claw tip to help her balance a particularly difficult rock. She clapped in delight. "And what do you think?" Kareth asked. Grant watched Amy's joy and smiled despite himself. "I think the corporation is run by idiots. This colony has never been safer. Before, people feared you. Now they respect you. That's worth more than terror any day." He paused. "But I can't stop corporate orders. They own the mining rights, which means they control security contracts." "I understand." "Do you? Because I'm telling you I want you to stay. I'm telling you this place is better with you here, even changed as you are. Especially changed as you are." Before Kareth could respond, proximity alarms screamed across the colony's defense grid. Everyone froze. Those alarms only sounded for one thing: incoming ships with hostile intent. 3 vessels dropped out of atmospheric entry, small and fast, bearing markings that Grant recognized immediately. His face went pale. "Raiders, the Broken Spur Gang. They hit frontier colonies, take whatever isn't nailed down, and burn the rest." Amy looked up at the noise, confused by the sudden tension. Lynn appeared from the medical center and ran toward her daughter. David emerged from the maintenance bay carrying a welding tool like it might help. The lead raider ship broadcast on open channels. "Talvos 9 colony, you have 10 minutes to gather everything valuable and bring it to the landing pad. Resist and we'll crack your domes and let this charming atmosphere do our work for us." Grant activated his communicator. "This is Colony Administrator Williams. We're a mining operation with minimal resources. We have nothing worth your time." Laughter came through the speakers. "Oh, we know what you have. We know the legendary Ashen Claw is here, or what's left of him anyway. Word in the outer systems is he's been tamed by refugees. Spends his days playing nursemaid. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to load up everything worth taking and we're going to leave. And your pet dragon is going to sit there and watch because everyone knows he's lost his edge." The 3 ships landed in triangle formation around the main colony structures. Hatches opened and raiders poured out, maybe 40 in total, armed with plasma rifles and demolition charges. They moved with the confidence of people who'd done this before. Kareth stood slowly. Amy reached for his leg, wanting to be picked up like he usually did. He gently moved her toward her parents instead. Lynn pulled her daughter close, and Kareth saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, fear for him. "Please," Lynn said quietly, "they're not worth it." David grabbed Grant's arm. "We can give them what they want. Supplies can be replaced." But Grant was watching Kareth's face, watching something shift in those ancient copper eyes. Not rage, not the mindless violence of old instincts. Something focused and precise and absolutely certain. Amy squirmed in her mother's arms. She didn't understand why Kareth wouldn't hold her. She called out to him, using the special babbling sound she'd started making that only came when she saw him. One of the raiders laughed. "Is that the mighty Ashen Claw playing baby games while we rob him blind?" Kareth spread his wings fully for the first time in 3 weeks. The movement created a shadow that swallowed half the colony. He rose to his full height, and suddenly everyone remembered exactly how massive he actually was. The ground trembled. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the gentleness Amy had taught him. It rolled across the colony like thunder before an avalanche. Ancient, absolute, final. You may test whether gentleness means weakness. I do not recommend it. The lead raider actually took a step backward before catching himself. You're bluffing. Everyone knows you're domesticated now. Kareth's eyes blazed like molten copper. I was never domesticated. I was unused. My strength had no purpose beyond causing pain, but now I have something worth protecting, and you have made the fatal mistake of threatening it. He looked at Amy one last time. She had stopped crying, watching him with those trusting brown eyes. He thought about how she'd crawled into his shadow without fear, how she'd shown him what it meant to be gentle, how gentleness wasn't the opposite of strength but its highest form. Then he showed the raiders exactly what 800 years of evolutionary perfection looked like when it chose to stop holding back. The battle lasted 4 minutes. Kareth moved like lightning given form. His wings created wind that knocked raiders off their feet before they could aim. His tail swept through their defensive positions like they were made of smoke. But what stunned everyone watching was the precision. He didn't kill. Every strike was calculated to disable, disarm, terrify. A raider fired plasma rounds directly at his chest. The bolts splashed against his scales like water against stone. Kareth surged forward, grabbed the man's rifle in his jaws and crushed it to scrap metal, then tossed the raider toward his companions hard enough to knock 3 more down, but not hard enough to cause permanent damage. Another group tried to circle behind him. Kareth's tail caught them mid-stride and swept them into a cargo container. The metal dented. The raiders groaned but got back up. He could have killed them all in seconds. Instead, he was teaching them a lesson. The lead raider, braver or stupider than the others, charged forward with a plasma blade. Kareth let him get close, let him swing, let the blade connect with his foreleg. The weapon shattered against his scales without leaving a mark. Kareth lowered his head until his snout nearly touched the raider's face. I have stood in the heart of dying stars, Kareth said, his voice quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. I have fought wars that ended species. I have lived 8 centuries learning every way there is to cause harm, and I am choosing not to kill you. Do not mistake that choice for inability. The raider dropped the broken hilt and ran. His crew followed. They scrambled back to their ships, firing cover shots that did nothing except score the ground. Engines screamed to life. Within 60 seconds, all 3 vessels were airborne and accelerating toward escape velocity. Kareth could have pursued, could have torn them from the sky. Instead, he watched them flee and then turned back to the colony. The silence was absolute. Every person stood frozen, remembering stories they'd half dismissed as exaggeration, seeing proof that the legends weren't just true but had somehow been understatements. Grant found his voice first. You could have killed them all. Yes, but you didn't. No. Why not? Kareth looked at Amy, still held in her mother's protective embrace. The baby had stopped being scared the moment the fighting started, as if she'd known instinctively that Kareth would keep everyone safe. She reached toward him now, wanting to be close again. Because she taught me that strength without mercy is just another form of weakness, Kareth said. And because I wanted those raiders to spread a new story, not about the ashen claw who destroys everything, about the guardian who protects what matters. David stepped forward, still holding his useless welding tool. His voice shook slightly. We judged you by your past. Amy saw your potential. Lynn added, she saw what you could become if someone gave you a reason. The colony workers began moving again, checking for injuries, securing damaged equipment. But the way they moved around Kareth had changed. No more wide detours, no more hushed warnings. They passed close by him like he was just another part of the colony. Some even nodded in thanks. Grant pulled out his communicator and opened a direct line to corporate headquarters. This is Colony Administrator Williams, regarding your order to terminate security contract with Kareth. I'm formally rejecting that order. The response came back immediately. You don't have authority to reject corporate decisions. Then fire me, because I'm not removing him. This colony was just attacked by 40 armed raiders. They're fleeing the system right now because of him, and he did it without killing a single one of them. That's not soft. That's refined. That's exactly what we need. The corporation hired a weapon, not a guardian. Then the corporation got the better deal, Grant said and cut the connection. Kareth felt something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize it as belonging, not being hired, not being used, being wanted for what he chose to be rather than what he'd always been. Amy made her insistent sound again. Lynn walked closer and carefully placed her daughter on the ground. Amy immediately crawled toward Kareth faster than her parents expected. She reached his front leg and pulled herself up using his scales like a ladder, made it halfway up before running out of strength. Kareth helped with one careful claw, lifting her to his shoulder. She settled there like she'd found her favorite spot in the universe. Started babbling the story of the scary ships and the loud noises, her words too young to make sense but her excitement. Perfectly clear. Over the next week, something shifted in Talvos 9. The mining corporation sent increasingly aggressive messages about contract violations and liability issues. Grant ignored all of them. The workers started a petition saying if corporate wanted Kareth gone, they'd walk off the job. Even the families who'd been most scared of him added their names. News spread through communication channels to other colonies, stations, settlements across the sector. The story changed each time it was told, but the core remained the same. The Ashen Claw, the monster from Legends, had been changed by a human baby. Not tamed, not broken, evolved. Other colonies started asking questions. If the most feared creature in 17 systems could become a protector, what did that mean for all the other monsters they'd written off? What else was possible? A research station sent a message asking if Kareth would be willing to transport sensitive medical supplies through pirate territory. A mining operation on the system's edge requested his presence during labor negotiations with a hostile faction. Parents from settlements 3 systems away asked for advice on how to teach their children that fear and respect were different things. Kareth declined most of them. His purpose had become specific. Amy needed him here while she grew. The colony needed him here while it found stability. And he needed to be here while he continued learning what it meant to choose gentleness from a position of strength rather than have it forced through weakness. On Amy's first birthday, the entire colony gathered for celebration. Lynn and David had managed to create a cake from whatever ingredients the colony stores could provide. Amy destroyed it with both hands, laughing as frosting went everywhere, including all over Kareth's scales. Grant gave a speech about second chances and chosen family, about how the strongest walls were built not from fear but from mutual protection, about how a colony was more than just workers and quotas, it was people caring for each other. Kareth listened and realized he wasn't alone anymore. Hadn't been since a baby crawled into his shadow and decided he was worth trusting. 800 years of isolation had ended not with grand gestures or destiny, but with one small human seeing potential where everyone else saw only threat. Amy fell asleep against his side as the celebration wound down, exactly as she had that first storm-tossed night. And Kareth understood that this was his purpose now, not destruction, protection, not inspiring fear, earning trust, not being the monster from Legends, being the guardian that Legends forgot to mention. 5 years passed like water flowing downstream, inevitable and transformative. Amy turned 6 on a Tuesday morning with clear skies, rare for Talvos 9. She'd grown from a crawling baby into a fearless child who treated Kareth's massive form like her personal climbing structure. Her parents had long since stopped worrying when she disappeared, knowing exactly where to find her. Usually perched on Kareth's shoulders, telling him stories about everything she'd learned that day. The colony had transformed too. Word spread that Dragon's Shadow, as it had been renamed, was the safest settlement in the sector. Refugees from 3 different conflicts had found homes here. The mining operation expanded with corporate finally accepting they weren't going to get Kareth removed. New families arrived every month, and their children grew up thinking it was perfectly normal to have an ancient dragon as a neighbor. Kareth discovered he was good at things beyond violence. His flame breath, once used only for destruction, could now weld damaged hull sections with precision that surprised the maintenance crews. His wings created wind breaks during storms. His size made him perfect for transporting heavy equipment across terrain too rough for vehicles. And his reputation meant pirates gave Dragon's Shadow extremely wide clearance. But the most unexpected thing was the effect he had on others like him. Chitresh arrived on a cold morning in late autumn. The colony's sensors picked up an unauthorized landing 3 kilometers outside the main settlement. Grant sent a team to investigate, Kareth included. What they found was a creature that made most of the team step back instinctively. Chitresh stood 4 meters tall on 6 legs, covered in chitinous armor that gleamed dark green in the sunlight. Mandibles large enough to shear through steel framed a face that human evolution had programmed people to fear. Former assault soldier for the Hive Collective, according to the broken translator collar around what passed for a neck. Escaped, hunted, desperate. The investigation team raised weapons. Chitresh raised bladed forelimbs in response. Both sides tensed for violence. That seemed inevitable. Then Kareth stepped between them. "You are running," he said simply, not a question. Chitresh's mandibles clicked in surprise at being addressed directly. The translator sputtered to life. "Yes, fled service, Hive wants recapture, heard stories, place where monsters find peace. Thought stories were lies, stories always are." "They're not lies," Grant said carefully, lowering his weapon. "But we need to know you won't hurt anyone here." "Hurt?" Chitresh's entire body seemed to sag. "Spent 200 cycles hurting. Done with hurting, want rest, want choice, want what stories promised." Amy chose that moment to come running over the hill, late as usual to wherever adults told her to be. She skidded to a stop when she saw Chitresh. Everyone tensed. Here was the test. A child encountering exactly the kind of creature that nightmares were made from. Amy walked straight toward Chitresh with zero hesitation. "Are you a friend of Kareth's?" The translator took a moment to process the question. Chitresh looked at Kareth, then at the small human, then back at Kareth. "Not yet friend, just arrived." "Well, any friend of Kareth's is my friend too," Amy announced with the absolute certainty only 6-year-olds possessed. "I'm Amy. Do you want to see the colony? We have the best sunset view in the whole sector. Kareth showed me." Chitresh made a sound the translator couldn't interpret. Later, they'd learn it was the Hive Collective equivalent of crying. The creature lowered all its forelimbs and bent down to Amy's level. "Small human is not afraid." "Why would I be afraid? You look sad, not scary." David arrived a moment later, slightly out of breath from chasing his daughter. He took in the scene and seemed to understand immediately what was happening. He'd seen it 5 years ago with Kareth. His daughter had a talent for seeing past what things looked like to what they actually were. "Welcome to Dragon's Shadow," David said, offering his hand to Chitresh. "We have a spare housing unit that should fit you. It'll need modifications, but we're good at that here." Over the following weeks, Chitresh integrated into colony life with the same careful adjustment Kareth had made. Turned out the creature was brilliant with mathematics and helped optimize the mining operations for 30% better yield. Also turned out Chitresh loved music, spending evening hours in the colonies. Recreation center, listening to whatever anyone would play. And Chitresh was just the first. A crystalline being named Shale arrived 3 months later. Former weapon of a now-dead empire, capable of generating gravity fields strong enough to crush starships. Found peace helping with construction projects, creating supports that would last centuries. Then came Broken Wing, a reptilian flyer who'd been a courier for criminal organizations. Started teaching colony children about atmospheric patterns and weather prediction. By the end of the year, Dragon's Shadow had become something unprecedented. A settlement where the galaxy's unwanted, the creatures everyone else feared or used or discarded, could come and simply be. Not because they were captured or reformed or controlled, but because someone had shown them that transformation was possible. Amy moved through all of it with the same fearless acceptance she'd shown Kareth, made friends with Chitresh, and taught the Hive collective member human games, convinced Shale to create crystal sculptures that caught the sunset, flew on broken wings back with her parents screaming from the ground until they saw how careful the former criminal was with precious cargo. Galactic Council representatives arrived to study what they called the Dragon's Shadow phenomenon. They interviewed colony members trying to understand how it worked, how creatures engineered for violence found peace, how fear transformed into trust. David met with them, speaking as the unofficial ambassador for the colony. "You're asking the wrong question," he told them. "You want to know how we changed them, but we didn't. They changed themselves. We just gave them something no one else did." "And what's that?" the lead representative asked. "A reason and the space to choose who they wanted to become instead of who they'd been forced to be. Humans survived Earth not by conquering its monsters, but by understanding them. Kareth isn't our weapon. He's our friend. There's a difference." The representatives studied their data and wrote reports that spread through official channels. Some governments saw opportunity, others saw threat, but the message spread regardless. Redemption was possible, change was real, and sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was give someone a reason to be better. Amy sat with Kareth one evening as the binary sun set. She'd started reading lessons at school and was currently struggling through a book about ancient Earth. "It says here that dragons used to be bad guys in old stories," she said, frowning at the text. "Many stories paint things as simply bad or good," Kareth rumbled. "Reality is more complex. But you're not bad, you're the best. I was not always as you see me now, small one. I hurt many before you found me." Amy processed this with the seriousness she applied to difficult concepts. "But you're different now because you chose to be. Because you gave me a reason to choose." "No," Amy said firmly. "I just showed up. You did the hard part. You decided being gentle was stronger than being scary." Kareth felt the weight of those words. From the mouths of children, they said, came truth that adults forgot. And Amy was right. She hadn't changed him. She just trusted him enough to let him change himself. "Will you teach me to be strong like you?" Amy asked. "Not the scary kind, the protecting kind." "Yes," Kareth promised. "I will teach you what I have learned. That true strength comes not from what you can destroy, but from what you choose to protect. And that the hardest strength of all is being gentle when you have the power to be anything else." 10 years after Amy crawled into his shadow, Kareth stood at the edge of Dragon's Shadow watching 3 new arrivals descend through the atmosphere. The colony had grown to nearly 5,000 permanent residents now, with another 1,000 rotating through at any given time. Half the population was human. The other half was made up of 43 different species, most of whom had arrived because they'd heard the stories. Stories about monsters finding redemption, about the Ashen Claw becoming something new, about a place where your past didn't define your future. Amy was 16 now, tall and confident, leading a group of younger children through evacuation drills. She'd become exactly what Kareth had seen potential for all those years ago. Strong enough to protect, gentle enough to understand, brave enough to look past surfaces to see what lay beneath. She worked with Grant now, helping new arrivals adapt, teaching them what Dragon's Shadow had learned about second chances. The ships landed smoothly. Their passengers emerged slowly, the way people did when they expected violence. 2 were humanoid species Kareth didn't recognize. The third was massive, easily Kareth's size, covered in thick-scaled hide, and radiating the same kind of danger that Kareth had once worn like armor. Grant approached with Amy at his side. Standard welcome protocol. "I'm Grant Williams, Colony Administrator. This is Amy Chen, Integration Specialist. Welcome to Dragon's Shadow." The massive creature, who introduced itself as Torven, looked around at the settlement with visible confusion. "Stories said this place accepts any who seek peace, but I see no weapons, no restraints, no guards except him." Torven gestured at Kareth. "You are not afraid." "Should we be?" Amy asked. "I destroyed 17 settlements, killed thousands. I am what your people call a war criminal. So was Kareth, Amy said simply. And Chitresh, and probably half the settlement's population if we're being honest. We don't ask what you were, we ask what you want to become. Torven's eyes, remarkably human-like despite the alien face, focused on Kareth. You are the Ashen Claw. I heard stories when I was young. You were what we aspired to be, unstoppable, merciless, perfect. I was empty, Kareth corrected. Perfection at destruction is merely another form of death. I am better now. How? Kareth looked at Amy, who smiled like she knew what he was going to say. A small human crawled into my shadow and trusted me when trust was illogical. She gave me the opportunity to choose who I wished to be rather than who I had always been, and I chose to be better. Amy stepped forward, completely unafraid of the massive war criminal looming over her. We all choose every day. The colony will give you space to figure out who you want to be, work to do if you want it. People who will treat you based on your choices here, not your past out there, but you have to make the choice. We can't do that part for you. Over the next year, Torven made that choice. Slowly, like ice melting in sunlight, the violence that had defined the creature's existence transformed into protective instinct. Torven became a rescue specialist, using that massive strength to pull people from collapsed buildings, to clear disaster zones, to be first into danger so others didn't have to be. Galactic representatives visited regularly now. Some came to study. Some came to recruit. One representative from an advanced species, the Anashi Collective, spent 3 weeks interviewing colony members before requesting a private meeting with Kareth. We've analyzed your transformation extensively, the Anashi said. Her species was tall and thin, with skin that shifted colors based on emotion. Currently, she was deep blue, which Kareth had learned indicated serious thought. We've tried to replicate the dragon's shadow effect in other locations. It doesn't work. Why do you believe that is? Kareth asked. Because we're missing the essential element. We thought it was the acceptance, the lack of judgment, the opportunity for change. But those things existed elsewhere and failed. What makes dragon's shadow work is something else entirely. Amy joined them, bringing water for the Anashi. At 16, she'd grown into her role as the heart of the colony's integration process. It's not complicated, she said. It's just hard. The Anashi's skin shifted to curious yellow. Explain. Most places that try this approach still see people as categories. Refugees, criminals, weapons, monsters. They're trying to fix broken things, but we don't see anyone as broken. Kareth wasn't broken when I met him. He was unused. There's a difference. I don't understand the distinction. Kareth rumbled softly. She means that your other settlements begin with the assumption that violence and fear are problems to be solved. Dragon's Shadow begins with the assumption that violence and fear are understandable responses to not having anything worth protecting. Give someone purpose, give them choice, give them reason to be gentle, and they will transform themselves, but only if you actually believe they can. You believe everyone can change. No, Amy said honestly. Some people are too damaged. Some have gone too far, but you can't know until you give them the chance. And if you don't believe in them, they won't believe in themselves. The Anashi departed with more questions than answers, but her report would spread through diplomatic channels. Other colonies would try, and some would succeed. Not all, never all, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that redemption wasn't just possible, but natural when conditions allowed. Amy's 17th birthday arrived during harvest season. The colony threw celebrations that lasted 3 days because Amy had touched nearly every life in Dragon's Shadow in some way. She'd helped Torven find peace. She'd taught Chitresh human music. She'd shown Broken Wing that freedom didn't mean isolation. And she'd never stopped being the fearless child who crawled toward danger because she saw potential instead of threat. On the final evening of celebration, as both suns set and filled the sky with colors that still amazed Kareth after a decade of watching, Amy found him at their usual spot overlooking the colony. Do you remember when I was little and asked you to teach me to be strong? She said, settling against his side like she always had. I remember everything from the moment you entered my shadow. I think I understand now what you meant, about being gentle when you have power to be anything else. It's not about being weak or nice. It's about having enough strength that you don't need to prove it, that you can choose kindness because you're secure enough in yourself that you don't have to hurt things to feel strong. You have become the teacher, Kareth said softly. Because I had the best teacher. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Dragon's shadow spread below them, lights coming on in homes and shops and community centers. A colony built not on fear, but on the radical idea that anyone could choose to be better if someone believed in them enough to let them try. Kareth thought about 800 years of violence, about being a weapon so long he'd forgotten weapons could choose not to fire, about the night a baby crawled into his shadow and shattered everything he'd believed about himself, about 10 years of learning that gentleness wasn't weakness, but the highest form of strength. A dragon had never been gentle because a dragon had never been given a reason. One small human with absolutely no fear and infinite trust became that reason. And in being gentle, Kareth discovered he was stronger than he had ever been when he was only fierce. Because true strength wasn't about what you could destroy. It was about what you chose to protect. And more importantly, who you chose to become when someone finally gave you the choice. Amy fell asleep against his side as she had 10 years ago. And Kareth kept watch over Dragon's shadow, guardian of a place that proved every day that monsters were just people who'd never been given a reason to be anything else.